Hello and welcome back to Logical Magic Examining Esoterica. Hey guys, today for you I have an interview with Jack from Spooky Scoundrel on TikTok. Jack is a paranormal investigator and researcher, and also they conduct ghost tours in a haunted village in Toronto, Canada. I will let Jack explain all of that to you, but they've been kind enough to join me today to start talking about the paranormal, some of their beliefs on it. I did an episode not that long ago on what causes hauntings and what ghosts are, but this is an area where everyone is working with theory. And so therefore there's nobody who has the one and only truth. We all in our connection find a way to be connected to the way we can process the truth. And so Jack may have different views than I do, but that doesn't mean that he is right and I'm wrong, or vice versa. It means that there is a lot to an unseen world that we don't fully understand, except that we know that it's there. Hey guys, before I get started, let's get the housekeeping out of the way, because I've been told I need to put it at the top of the broadcast versus the bottom. If you need to find me, you can find me at therisingmoon.com to book me for a tarot card reading or a life coaching session. If you want to see my YouTube channel, that is cronecast at the rising moon, where I do pick a cards. There's some daily messages up there. I've got a Patreon coming in 2024 that will give you greater access to the daily energy reads. And I think that's about it for me. And when we get to the bottom of this, we're going to talk to Jack where you can find them for their socials, but I know them through TikTok's Spooky Scoundrel, where I've seen really, really fun ghost stories before, and we're going to get to talking to Jack. Hey, Jack, how are you today?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad that you were able to join me. I really am. I watch a lot of your TikToks. Let's get started talking about your methods, because you employ a very interesting method. It's called the Estes method, and it is most paranormal investigators use something called the spirit box, which is a little bit like a paranormal radio, for lack of a better term. Jack and the people that Jack works with use something called the Estes method, which is very fascinating to me because it employs both sensory deprivation and sensory overload to achieve a channeling or a trance-like state. So, Jack, did I get most of that right? Because you're the investigator and I'm the student here.
Yeah, you absolutely got that right. So the Estes method was developed in 2016 by Carl Pfeiffer, Connor Randall, and Michelle Tate.
Mhm.
And it really changed how we communicate with the other side, in terms of giving us this more direct, almost conversational method of investigating.
That is something I really like people to understand, is that in paranormal situations, particularly channelers, I am a channeler, it is a form of channeling, that you are able to open up your consciousness into another dimension to pick up what is being said there. How long have you been doing this, Jack?
So I've been doing the Estes method for a few years, and then investigating for almost 20 at this point.
Oh, wow. You got into this when you were very young. What was the lure? Did you have an experience?
I did. I think everyone who is an investigator had some kind of experience when they were younger. I grew up in a house that my family thought was haunted. We never saw anything, but a lot of weird experiences. I think I had my first paranormal experience when I was only 6 years old. Still something I can't really explain to this day. And then I went to a haunted high school and had a lot of experiences there as well. That just got me really, really interested in trying to figure out why we have this ability to communicate with the other side and what exactly is going on there.
Well, one of the coolest things about you read tarot, I'm a professional tarot reader. One of the coolest things about tarot is that you can lay out the cards, and we both prefer the looking into your subconscious to helping people grow and evolve approach to tarot, even though I do predictive tarot as well. It's a really good cool tool for looking into people. And one of the things that we need to understand is that as soon as you do that, as soon as somebody says anything that has any validity to you, they are proving to you that there is more to this world than we can see. And even if we don't understand life after this particular form, it was C.S. Lewis that said, you do not have a soul. You are a soul. You have a body. And that is one of the bases for understanding that there is something that happens to us after this physical life has expired. That does not mean our spiritual or our consciousness has in any way expired. So what happened to you when you were 6, Jack?
So I had just moved into a home with my family, and it was our first night inside this building. And of course, for some reason, my bedroom was decided to be the attic. So I was upstairs in the attic. First night in a weird home. You're that young. Things are a bit strange, but I was exhausted from the move, and I fell asleep pretty quickly. But then the next morning, when my mom asked me how I'd slept in our new home, I had told her that I was kept up a lot of the night because of the kids next door playing. This was a row of 10 houses, all attached. It was a very old home, probably about 100 years old. And yeah, I complained about these kids, our neighbors that had been up playing late into the night, screaming and doing kid sounds and stuff like that. And I was like, I hope they don't do that tonight. Maybe we can talk to them so I can sleep. And my mom just looks at me and goes, "There's no kids next door. They don't have kids." I'm like, no, I heard them playing. And that honestly was kind of the end of that until a few years later, my mother had found an article written about our home in our community newspaper because it was a bit of a historic home. And she brought the article to me and she's like, "Hey, look at what I found. Look at how they talk about the history of our place." And we found out the row of houses itself had previously been used as a number of different things. It was a home for nuns who taught at the school up the road. It was over 100 years old, in fact. But at one point, it was hotel. And so, people could rent, I guess, individual rooms in this long row. And the article specifically mentioned that on rainy days, because the attics were completely open and not separated between each building, kids would run and play in the attic. And I saw that and went, okay. So at this point, I was probably about 10 or 12. And I was like, maybe that means what I experienced was some kind of haunting. But it didn't feel like it was a ghost to me necessarily. It felt more maybe like the memory of the space. Yeah. And that's kind of what got me on this journey of, what is a haunting? Is it a ghost every time? Or is it a product of our brains? Is it a memory, an imprint on the building? So that was pretty impactful.
That's one we fully agree on, and I did just do a podcast on haunting, and I talk about what an energy imprint is and how, since time is happening all at once versus being linear, our thinking about it being linear and time being linear are not the same thing. In fact, time is not linear. Is that there are energetic blueprints, and two things that you identified caught me, because anything involving spiritual workers and the nuns, priests, anything that is, if they're focusing on something, then the opposite is attracted to it. And so it can have a very strange energy. So churches have a tendency to be some of the most haunted places on earth. And then hotels containing a very transient space where people are usually having this very kind of like elevated and intense experience because they're out of their home environment, are primed for those energy imprints. So now, what do you do now? Because I know what you do now, but I'd love to hear you explain it to people because it's so fun to watch these stories.
Yeah. So in addition to my work as a paranormal investigator, going into these buildings, trying to figure out what's going on, talk to the ghosts or spirits that may be haunting them, I also do ghost tours. And that is something that I've been doing for 10 years now. I just passed my 10th season with the company I work for. And it's really, really fun because it merges my love and passion for exploring the other side and treating people after they pass as still human beings, but also exploring the history and how their spirits bring the history that we talk about to life again, and how we can treat the stories and the ghosts almost with the same weight, because it's just a continuation of what had happened previously. It's performing as well, which I love to do. I love storytelling just in general. And I get to meet so many interesting and amazing people through this work as well. And I've heard some really cool ghost stories along the way.
I bet. Like there's one of the things, and I think it was from one of your investigations versus one of your ghost tours, is that Jack has a clip in which your hair is moved by a ghost, and you can totally see it. Like there's no question about it. It's like, oh yeah, nothing else could have done that. It's actually it's astonishing in the best way. And it was when you had the headphones on for the Estes method. And it was really, it's very, very fascinating. I genuinely urge you to check out Jack's TikTok. Again, that's Spooky Scoundrel. And if anybody, like Jack is not going to be, you're not going to be familiar enough with this. I have a divine message deck whose nickname is Spooky. And so it was one of the reasons that that's Spooky over there. One of the reasons that I was really drawn to your TikTok was I was like, Spooky Scoundrel, I'm in. And there are
I love that.
clips on there. Can you tell me a little bit about your experiences working, because you encountered the same spirits over and over again, do you not?
Yeah, a lot of the time I do converse, I like to say, with the same spirits. And that's because I'm in these same spaces quite frequently. And, we know the stories of those people and we know their connections to the buildings. I think one of the most interesting things about some of the places I go to at the Pioneer Village I work at is that these people built these homes with their bare hands.
Mm.
These are from the early 1800s, and the amount of care and love they put into building these homes for their families, it's no wonder they're still there, right? These places were so important to them. And it's kind of nice knowing that you'll go in there and you'll probably talk to them again, because it does start to feel a little bit like you're getting to know them as people, and having those conversations that I do think are so important.
You're always so courteous to them, and I always appreciate that. You treat the because there are spirits that are just energy imprints that we talked a little bit about, but there are, and that's again something else I covered, there are ones that still have their sentience and their consciousness and are interactive as well. And so there are repeated ones, and it is a pioneer village in Canada, our neighbors to the north. I'm in Southern California, and Jack is in Toronto, Canada. But I also saw that I learned some things about Quebec that I did not know before, including that there had been a large battle that led to a lot of hauntings in Quebec City. And you visited a cemetery there for a paranormal investigation. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's one of the oldest cemeteries in Quebec City. And despite growing up going to Quebec very frequently, I am part Quebecois. Um, I had never actually visited that cemetery before, and looking into the history of it and then finally getting to go there was a really interesting and kind of awe-inspiring moment, just because of the history of the battle and the different types of people that did fight together to protect the land that they were on. And then the nuns, they had taken part in that as well and helped both sides, and the wounded from every different type of group that were fighting in that war.
And the
It's not the only war Quebec saw. There were many others that happened as well. But that was the first really big one.
And that was protecting Quebec City from the British, from what I understand. And you just touched upon something that, like, one of the reasons the story caught my attention was that it was a very diverse population that came together to fight for their city. And there were Indigenous people involved, there were French people involved, and there were Canadian people involved, is what I understand. You're going to know the history. I'm just like, I have a very cursory knowledge, so please correct me if I'm wrong on anything. What were your experiences there?
So I didn't really do much investigation while I was there. Personally, I'm not always the biggest fan of investigating cemeteries. I think that they are not constantly haunted. I'm not really sure why a spirit might stick around their body necessarily. They might be more inclined to go to somewhere that was important to them. But the experiences that I had at this cemetery were more experiences of reverence and just standing there with these headstones that were from the 1700s, and very early 1800s, seeing some of them, the trees had started growing around them, and just imagining the people and their history and how connected to the land they were, how they fought for the land. And then now they're part of the land itself, having been buried there. And I just think it's really important to treat even these places like cemeteries where we bury our dead and then, try to move on, just treating them with that same respect that we approach a haunted situation.
I think that's just a really key point for anyone who is interested in paranormal investigating and in the paranormal. And it's one of the reasons that I dissuade people from using Ouija boards and spirit boards unless they're doing it in a consecrated circle. And like, there's a lot of prep that should go into using a spirit board. And part of the reason non-human entities, which we both agree on something, that they're not all demons, they're not. Some of them are simply non-human entities that are drawn to those portals that are being opened. Part of the reason that people have such negative experiences and are likely to get such, if not malicious, then not positive attachments from them, is that it is done in a way that it is disrespectful to the idea of what's on the other side of that. So the advice that I have for people in paranormal investigating is always try to approach everything as if you were talking to something that has feelings that matter, and you're far more likely to get a better experience. In the work that you do with ghost tours, because I've seen you interact with a spirit called Michael, and that seems to be a spirit that you encounter very frequently. Can you tell me a little bit about Michael and what Michael has done?
Of course. Michael is a spirit that haunts his family home. It was a building constructed in 1832, and he passed not long after. So he passed in 1845 at the age of 18.
Oh, wow.
Now, of course, in the 1840s, 18 is not young by those standards. It was a tragic death. He passed from a hunting accident. And unfortunately, we don't actually know exact details of his passing. We just know that it was an accident. Um, and I have a bit of a theory that because he did lose his life a bit younger, he's a little bit more of a lighthearted, playful spirit. Definitely a bit of a trickster, loves to make himself known to the people that are inside the buildings. On our ghost tours, we hear everything from footsteps to, things moving in the home itself. We've seen the chains that block the bedrooms off, kind of swinging back and forth when no one's been around them. But if I have the time, I would love to share a personal experience with Michael that it really shifted my perspective. And I think it really reaffirmed certain beliefs that I have in how we approach spirits and hauntings. I was telling a ghost story at the top of a staircase inside Michael's home. And it was a bit of a bigger crowd with me. So I was maybe a little closer to the stairs than I should have been. And I was standing there to make sure no one else came near the staircase. And I was telling my story. And I guess as a storyteller, moved around a little bit, and one of my feet stepped over the top of the staircase, and I started to fall backwards. And I had this moment of, okay, so I'm going to die in Michael's house. I will also be a ghost here, because I really did feel like I was going to fall backwards down this staircase. And as I'm trying to panic and find my footing and grab onto something to prevent me from falling, I feel two full hands on my shoulders, the back of my shoulders. I could feel all 10 fingers. It was unmistakably hands. And they pushed me the opposite direction. And it was a very gentle, but very helpful push. And suddenly I was righted again. And I just remember feeling like someone went, uh-oh, be careful, you're falling, and helped me. And since then, I have never been unsettled in that home. Sometimes you go into the dark by yourself and you go, I'm going to talk to ghosts now. And it's very easy to get scared doing that. But I've never felt any kind of negativity or even just malicious intent in that building prior to that, but especially since that experience. And I just find it remarkable that he helped me out on that one. I could have been really hurt.
He said, I don't need the company right now. Let's go. Oopsie daisy.
Yeah, I like you
but they don't fall down.
I like you as a living person.
Exactly. You're more interesting in the flesh. So he tried to help you out with that. And that is, I think, when we talk about approaching spirits and approaching paranormal investigating with the idea that there is something that's still, if its sentience is still here, if part of its soul is still here, because it is part of a soul, to remember that, to try and interact with kindness, and then you will receive kindness in return as well. And it is something that kind of stood out for me in the investigating that you do, is that you are as courteous to these spirits that you are speaking to as you are to the people in your group, and you treat them with the same level of respect. And when you talked about the experience you had when you were 6, now, like again, we have not met before, and so you don't know some of my stories either. My son started having experiences in a house that we lived in Denver that was wholly positive as well. Not all things that are unseen are creepy and crawly, and unfortunately, not all things that we catch on films and in recordings are actually ghosts. And I used to have this experience all the time on my YouTube channel. My big dog Oscar was milling around in the background here, if anybody's watching the video version on YouTube. And I'm mildly allergic to Oscar. And I'm not allergic to my other dog, but he has an undercoat and he has a ton of dander. And so people used to be in the comment section over and over, orb at this time, orb at that time. And I'm like, it's my dog's Oscar dander, because they get caught in the frames of the light coming off of the ring light, which I don't have on today, so I don't blind you all with my paleness today. But can you talk to me a little bit about false readings, false positives, and things like orbs? Because these are the things that people debunk paranormal things because people invest in these. Come on, that's a Desmond, on the ring camera, that's an insect. Real investigators, people who aren't just doing it for reality TV, not to dump on anybody, but real investigators try to hold everything to a standard of whether or not it can be disproven and explained away by something mundane first. Correct?
Absolutely. And I think a really common misconception that I've actually noticed coming up a lot recently in the paranormal field, and I'm even going to make a video on this, I think, soon, is the idea that debunking doesn't equate non belief in anything. So
Yes.
just because we try to explain things, just because we try to come to rational conclusions about an experience we might be having or evidence we've captured, it doesn't mean that we don't believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes because we have been given so many paranormal TV shows and paranormal YouTubers and stuff like that who don't necessarily always go through those debunking steps, the people that do debunk get called non-believers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there is a huge space for people who do believe in the paranormal and the possibility of hauntings, as well as people who are skeptical. I always call myself a middle ground skeptic, because even though I've had experiences my entire life, I've seen full bodied apparitions, I've been touched a number of times, things I can't explain, I'm still skeptical. I'm still going to try to explain them every single time something happens, because when I can't explain it, it's so much more exciting. And
Exactly.
knowing that I've gone through those steps, then my belief becomes stronger in the paranormal. So I think because I'm really, really into debunking, I have a strong belief at the same time, because I know the things I haven't debunked are likely something interesting. You talked about orbs. Orbs are something that have been contested since the camera was being brought into investigations. When we had our film cameras on investigations, or when we were using tape recorders instead of audio recorders that we have now, the digital ones. And it's been something that we've always been aware of. As technology progresses, our awareness as investigators in the technology that we use is really important. We can't just take it at face value, because, like you said at the beginning of this episode, everything we do is theory. None of it is proven scientifically, but by consistently trying our methods, trying to explain when something happens that we may have an explanation for, and then allowing the things we can't explain to be big question marks, is what allows the field to progress, I think.
I fully agree with that. And please remember that if you hold everything, the old saying of if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras, is really what gets applied to this as well, is look for the reasonable explanation first, and then what remains behind is awe-inspiring rather than doubt-inducing. And that's really what the role of skepticism is in all of these spiritual fields and the paranormal field. And you also practice witchcraft in magic as well, is if you reach for the 3D experience first and then eliminate everything that could explain what the phenomena or the experience or the outcome is, then what the outcome is becomes more amazing, not less. and that in the kind of the roots of an idea of approaching everything with a scientific rather than a skeptical eye is the idea that what remains behind after you have discarded every practical explanation actually starts to constitute proof. And it's not just based in belief. What's the most compelling proof that you've seen outside of your, because her hair really, I beg your pardon, their hair really gets moved in that TikTok. And it's amazing to see. What beyond that one is the experience that really made you go, oh my gosh, well, I guess getting pushed up the stairs as well, but in something that wasn't your personal experience?
Yeah, I gotta say that hair one is probably it though. That's probably the biggest one because, it's tricky whenever you experience something personally without other witnesses. Um, as much as you want to fully believe in what you experienced, there's a tiny little doubtful voice in your mind that's like, oh, no one else saw that. No one else heard that. So you can't be certain. So something like capturing evidence on film is always really impactful. And if you try to explain it and then you can't, you get, really interesting things. Um, one of the, I think there's a clip of it on my TikTok as well. One of the other moments I had was an Estes session with my colleague Margot, and we were Margot was receiving and I was asking the questions, and I started hearing someone walking. It was either behind or above me. It was very distinct footsteps. You can hear it in the video. And I'm kind of whispering to the camera, I'm hearing footsteps. What is this? And then Margot, receiving on the Estes method, says, heard me? Ha ha ha. And it was just, it's a confirmation. And that's the type of activity and experiences that I always look for. We had an audible experience. I heard footsteps. I know Margot couldn't hear those because it was just the two of us and she's listening to the spirit box. And then to have her confirm that on the spirit box, it's layers. I call these layers of evidence. And
Yeah,
that's what I love.
that absolutely would be, and I beg your pardon for stepping on your pronouns like that. I tripped over my own tongue on that.
No worries.
One thing I want to point out about the story you just told, if people are unfamiliar with the Estes method, is that Margot could not hear you because there are noise canceling headphones in place. So the conversation or the phrases that she is picking up and sharing, or they are picking up and sharing, it's not based on anything you're saying or anything you're experiencing. So the fact that it came in a cadence that almost represented a conversation is actually tremendously compelling proof. What is the most haunted location that you have personally investigated?
I would say the village that I work at. And I think one of the reasons I would say that is not because the activity is, incredible every single night we're there and things aren't flying off the walls at us all the time. What it is it's consistent. And it's consistent in a way that points to potentially specific people that we are aware of in the history of the place, and that we have information that we are able to validate through our paranormal experiences. And one of the most remarkable things about this place is this village, is that every single building has a different haunting. And almost all of them on the property are haunted. And we're always asking ourselves, why are there so many ghosts here? What's going on with this location? And I think it's a combination of the space itself. It's on a river, and in paranormal theory, running water is often attributed to activity. It's on land that was settled first by these European pioneers who came over and started lives for themselves. They built these homes with their bare hands. And so I think it's just this perfect storm environment that is also a space where they have rest sometimes. It's a museum during the day, and then at night, nothing really happens. They're closed throughout the entire winter. And so there's this theory in the paranormal that spirits often go to places where we, the living, are not. It's why your attic is haunted. It's why your basement is haunted, right? It's places that it's places
I get away
that
from this.
they can't be bothered by people. And so I think that also maybe contributes to why they're so active. They get their rest, and then we show up and we try to talk to them, and we're respectful with how we talk to them as well. So I think it's many different factors. Um, but I've had haunted experiences in so many places. That's just one of the most reliable hauntings I think I have.
One of the things I want to address that you have brought up a couple of times is that these homes were built with like the intent and the two hands of everyone involved. And please remember that is something that will increase the likelihood of something being viewed with your life's energy, and then you are attached to it even after death. And even if it is just a fragment of the consciousness or the sentience of that person, there is a reason that it would be attached to something. Anything that we pour our life's energy into in focus becomes a part of us. And so those homes are a part of the people who poured so much of their hopes and their dreams for the future and their needs into it as well. So it constitutes almost every emotional realm that we experience as people. And you will find that here in the States as well, where there are colonial villages that are said to be incredibly haunted. I talked a little bit about Harper's Ferry, which everybody died in a raid during the Civil War, or right before, actually. Um, and that left behind a different type of energy signature. But the energy signature that you're talking about, the life's energy, would be everything that constitutes life: death, illness, happiness, joy, weddings, births. When there is everything that constitutes life imbued into a structure, it is far more likely, in my personal experience, to attract and keep and retain those spirits. And it is funny though. It's part of the reason that spirit activity is said to be so much more pronounced at night, is that those energies, when it has a sentience attached to it, have a tendency to try and avoid us because we're not likely, unless people are schooled, to interact in a way that honors the fact that this is a form of existence as well. Hey, Jack, it is my understanding that you're neurodivergent. Is that correct? Okay.
Absolutely.
Jacob and I have a podcast. I don't know where this is going to air yet because I am not the most structured person, as anybody who listens for any length of time knows. But we have a podcast coming up about what neurodivergence and the ability to be psychic and channel have in common. And there are multiple forms of neurodivergence. One would be attention deficit disorder. People with complex post-traumatic stress disorder frequently have their brains altered and the way that they receive in, and they become neurodivergent. So technically, I would be neurodivergent as well. But you are on the autism spectrum scale as well. You have found a way to make social interaction work for you as somebody who is naturally standing a little bit apart, as all people who are neurodivergent are. And I think it's something like 5 to 20% of the population are neurodivergent. We don't fully understand this yet. It is a science that continues to develop. What do you think your neurodivergence does to your ability to receive? Because it is my personal opinion that it enhances it because your brain works differently and therefore processes differently.
Yeah, I actually firmly believe that as well. And this is a conversation I had quite recently with someone in terms of how neurodivergence interacts and impacts the paranormal and how we operate within the field. It is a double-edged sword, of course, because it is, a disability at the end of the day. I think that one of the things that I personally have noticed in neurodivergent investigators versus neurotypical ones is that we understand communication is and can be very different for any type of person. And we understand having to come up with other ways of explaining ourselves because we're used to being misunderstood. We're used to exploring communication as not just a verbal method. And so I think that when we are in the paranormal field, I think that kind of ties in really well because we're not going to have the ghost sitting in front of us answering back using, the same words that we're using, right? We're not going to have that opportunity. And so it allows us to explore other ways of communication and tapping into those other types of ways and understanding when it comes to conversation. I also do think that, we do have a bit maybe of something else going on that makes us a bit more open and receptive. We're curious people. We always want to understand how things work. And when you're like me on the autism spectrum, you have special interests. And I think that that really helps me as well because it means I can only think about ghosts. It is the only thing on my mind 24 hours a day. And that means you really dive into things and you really get kind of like the meat of the excitement because you're so invested into it. I also have borderline personality disorder though, and that causes a couple of issues because I am prone to hallucinations, both audible and visual. And so it makes me um, have to question things a lot more. One of the kind of top types of symptoms of BPD is seeing shadow figures. And as a paranormal investigator, seeing shadow figures is kind of what you want, but you have to know that it's not your brain creating them. So it's allowed me to become a little bit more skeptical in a way as well, that also enhances the type of activity I get. It's a good question. I
Um,
have a lot of thoughts.
and again, like Jacob and I have an entire episode coming up about this, so I won't belabor the point too much. But I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't have borderline personality disorder, although many people with CPTSD do. I just was fortunate enough to develop some methods in caring for myself that helped me. And my theory on why neurotypical people are less likely to be highly sensitive to paranormal experience is that neurotypical people are used to inviting and expecting inclusion, whereas neurodivergent people are very used to the idea of, I have to figure out how to interact with the neurotypical people because I'm not made in exactly the same way. I don't process in exactly the same way, which makes you almost on a parallel with a different form of life in different dimensions, meaning that you're likely more able to communicate with them. And it is part of the reason I attract a lot of CPTSD survivors because it's a developing field. And I did not know that I was neurodivergent through repeated trauma until like just a few years ago when it began to be a developing field, and it explained a great deal. And it's a related thing. We have interlapping things, but it's not quite the same thing as autism. But it really fascinated me when I saw that about you because it began to, like we said, we try and find these things, these commonalities to start kind of constructing the proof that we can in a theory, in a field where nothing can be truly proven unless, a ghost materializes and gives an in-depth interview, which is not very likely. But it is one of the things that really intrigued me because I have found that people who inhabit the different spheres of neurodivergent are far more likely to be able to do things like be psychic, to practice magic, to have paranormal experiences. What you're talking about with BPD and needing to question things actually would make you, I believe, a more effective investigator because you do stand on that. I need to question my reality for my own well being stake already. And that's so it's, I don't know, it makes you, I think, uniquely suited to what you're doing, including the hyper focus of the need for those interests for people who have autism and often ADHD as well. So that gives you a way to have a passion about what you do that is not likely to be exhausted. What do you think, what does your future look like in paranormal investigating? What do you want to do with it?
So many things. I would love to get down to the States. I think that's one of my very, achievable future goals. Just because you folks have so many incredible hauntings down there. I'm not sure how this came about, but it does seem like the United States has a significantly higher excitement about their haunted locations. And so you do get these places that are operating entirely because they're haunted. We don't tend to have as many locations like that here. We've got a couple, of course, but a lot of them are operated more as museums during the day or might not even be available to the public to go into. And so I do want to get to some of those really well-known, notorious haunts. That would be a dream of mine. I just want to keep doing what I do. I want to keep helping people. I love exploring residential haunts, and even though I'm more of a specialized in historic hauntings, the residential ones have a bit of a soft spot in my heart because you're helping somebody come to terms with and share the space that they're in with something else that they can't see and are sometimes afraid of. And there's so much power in helping people reclaim their own power and kind of navigating these situations that they might be very fearful of. Making the paranormal less scary is kind of my tagline for everything, and I would love to really explore that and show more people that it's not always worth running and screaming.
Sometimes it is, and sometimes, and most of the time it's not. Sometimes it really is. It's like, get thee out of there, because that's the best life plan. But for the most part, interacting respectfully will afford you safety because you are acting as a guest rather than an interloper. And one of the things that we find in the States, I live on land that used to be part of Mexico. In fact, in most of my adult life, even though I used to live in Colorado, I lived in a part that used to be part of Mexico. And before that, it was the indigenous people inhabited this area. And in many areas that indigenous people inhabited in the United States, where it was taken away by force, there is actually a generational curse in place that involves elemental magic. And so it does draw a lot of activity. And some of the things that you should be like, let's boogie, because the Skinwalker Ranch is not a place to be like, hello, I treat you with great respect. Now I'm terrified. I've just peed. It really is a terrifying place sometimes, but most places that you're talking about, places like Charleston and Savannah, Harper's Ferry. I used to live in a part of New Jersey that has an old university in it as well that is well known to be haunted. And so there are a lot of hauntings, and we do invest energy in it. Whereas if you go over to Scotland or England, they kind of take it for granted that there'd be spooks and like everybody, and it's just treated as normally as street vendors in some instances. Where particularly in the United States would you be interested in investigating?
You said one of them, Savannah, Georgia. It's always been one of the tops. You know, being a ghost tour guide, I get to hear about other amazing tours that people have gone on to. And the ghost tours in Savannah, Georgia and Edinburgh are always the two that I hear the most about. And so, of course, they're like top of my list. New Orleans, of course, as well. I want to get to places like Gettysburg too, and just understanding this history that as a Canadian, I'm not completely connected to, and understanding, the paranormal theory behind having an entire collective of folks who know about this important historic moment and constantly visit it, thinking about it, and putting that energy into the space and feeding the hauntings that occur. And because I do believe that a lot of what causes these impactful, hugely historic haunts is the fact that we are still going there, believing that they are haunted. And I would love to prove that a little bit more.
Gettysburg is fascinating. I actually used to live in Pennsylvania many years ago. Gettysburg is an interesting place because it is filled with the energy of people who died very, very traumatically. And so it is a place to, if you want to be respectful to the entities and the energies, the spirits that remain behind in any place, please remember when you're interacting in a place, try to remember what was likely causing the hauntings and act as if you care about the energies that remain behind. It doesn't always mean interacting, but Gettysburg is one where we have a lot of tourism, and it always makes me a little uneasy because, like, oh my gosh, these very young people, they died so brutally. And over just, even the roots of the Civil War are so very distressing. And so it's a different type of energy. Savannah is a fun place, though. Savannah's got a lot of personality behind their hauntings as well. Hey, Jack, what would you suggest that people who are interested in the paranormal do? What are things to read, groups to join? Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, honestly, get your hands on absolutely everything. I think one of the best things we can do as investigators or people interested in investigation is to collect all types of different theories, and then from that boil it down into your own beliefs and theories. I will constantly watch paranormal TV, even though I don't necessarily agree with it a lot of the time, because I do want to see what other people are talking about and how they're approaching things in
Mhm.
order to justify my own beliefs and kind of develop what I want to experience and how I want to approach things. Amy Bruni and Adam Berry are two of my favorite investigators. They were both formerly on Ghost Hunters. They're on Kindred Spirits now together. and they both have books out. Amy Bruni's book is really incredible. I think it's 13 things, something about learning the afterlife. I don't have it in front of me. Adam Berry just released a new book as well. And so these are two people who are really, really into the theory of what goes on.
Would you mind spelling Amy's last name, Adam's last
Amy
name?
Bruni. Yeah, of course. So Adam Berry is just Berry. Adam. They are actually both on TikTok as well. I do follow them. And then Amy Bruni is Amy, Amy, and then Bruni, Amy Bruni.
Thank you.
No problem. And both of those books are absolutely incredible. I also think that there's an important distinction that needs to be made when you're starting out. And that's the fact that there is a difference between a ghost hunter and a paranormal investigator or researcher. Now, not better, one isn't better than the other. They're just different ways of exploring the same field. Ghost hunters are content going into a space, trying to get activity to happen, and then leaving with proof. Researchers or investigators, we tend to get down to the why, and we tend to get down to the who and the what exactly is going on. There's a lot of research that we do, and there's different approaches that we have, and figuring out how you want to exist in the space, I think, is a really important first thing to consider, because it'll shape how you move through haunted locations. Again, one is not better than the other. They're just different styles.
That actually makes a ton of sense to me, and something that it's a distinction that people need to understand. And particularly for some of the reality TV ghost hunter programs, remember they are edited to make things as sensational as possible. And the reality is that most paranormal investigation involves sitting around in the dark waiting for something to happen quite a bit.
8 hours, 10 hours. Yeah, it's not the half hour you get on TV.
Have you ever had a frightening experience?
Yes. I always feel really weird saying this. I don't get scared the same way I think other people might. And I think a lot of that has to do with, I understand I'm putting myself in these situations. I want things to happen. That's why I'm there in the first place. And so I'm not really scared by the idea that something will happen, because I know it will. That being said, though, I did have an experience on a tour once that didn't frighten me necessarily, but made me worried for the safety of the people I was in charge of. We were in a particular building. This is at the Pioneer Village. And I was standing in the living room, very small house. Like, you can see everybody from everywhere. I was standing in the living room with a woman who had come up to me, and she had previously mentioned she was sensitive. And so she was giving me these little asides throughout the whole tour saying, I saw this ghost, I saw this ghost. So she came up to me after I finished the story. And this home is not always a positive one. There is an energy there that does tend to be a little bit more on the aggressive side. I have a theory, you've touched on it. It's an elemental, I think. But she came up to me and she said, the man is in the house tonight. He's on the stairs and he's not happy we're here. And when I hear that kind of thing, I do take it with a bit of a grain of salt, just because, and I kind of went, oh, okay, good to know. And as soon as she said that, we heard a really loud banging from upstairs. And it was like as if someone had a cane and they were knocking on the floor. Now, the way these old homes are built, the floorboards sometimes make a lot of weird noises. And I knew that in some of the other houses we visit, if you're walking on a specific floorboard, it sounds like someone's upstairs, but you're downstairs. So I thought that's what it was. I asked everyone who was in the kitchen to stop moving. I called out, did anybody knock something over? Was anybody doing something? Everyone's like, no, we're just looking around. We're just doing this and this. And I was like, okay, cool. So maybe it wasn't us, but maybe it wasn't anything to be interested in either. And I said to the whole group, I went, all right, great. We're going to be here for 5 more minutes and then we'll head out. And as soon as I said that, it happened again, louder and way more violent than the first time. And this time it was actually so violent that the whole house shook and we felt it shake. So I look at this woman who's standing beside me. Her eyes are kind of bugging out at this point. And I felt like it was a direct response to me saying we're staying a little longer. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want, if it was not happy that we were there, we were going to leave. And so I yelled at my group, everyone get out right now. It was the most teacher voice I have ever put on. And, everyone ran out immediately. But the weirdest part about this experience was once we got on the front lawn, my group was like, what happened? Why did you get us to leave? What was going on? And despite the fact that they were literally in the room beside us in this tiny little house, they had not heard the banging. It was just me and the woman in the living room. And I'm not sure how that's possible. I really can't figure that one out. They should have heard it. It was so loud. Again, it shook the house. We felt the house shake. But for some reason, we were the only two who experienced that. And I think that's almost more unsettling than if we had all experienced
Yeah,
it.
no, that would, and thank goodness you had somebody there to validate it as well. You heard that, right? You heard, yeah, okay.
And her face showed she had heard it. Like her expression, she was really not, she was out of there faster than I was, I think.
I probably would be as well, and I can do things like remove demons, and I'd be like, yes, we're the GTFO. Let's get out of here right now.
You got to respect the boundaries.
It's one of the easiest ways to stay safe in any of this. And that's kind of what, as we finish up here, I'd kind of like to leave you with for anybody who is interested in paranormal investigation or ghost hunting or magic or spirit communication is pay attention to the vibe. Pay attention to the feedback that you're getting. And it is much easier to make a plan for a different day than to go through the steps of getting something off you that may become entangled with you if you don't respect the energy that is returning to you. So there are really good ways to stay safe, but the easiest way to stay safe is to trust your gut and to react to the environment as it is reacting to you and to pay attention to that. Jack, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find your material?
So I'm on TikTok, spooky.scoundrel. You can find me there quite easily. I do have a YouTube channel, although nothing is on there yet. But it is by the same name, spooky.scoundrel, all lowercase, because I'm a spooky little scoundrel.
Well, I love the name, and it was one of the reasons I was super drawn to your account. Jack, just thank you very much. You've been incredibly generous with your time and with your stories, and thank you for sharing so much of them. Everybody, this has been Logical Magic examining Esoterica. Remember, at therisingmoon.com. That's me, cronecast at The Rising Moon on YouTube. I have a TikTok account. I don't do very much on it, and I have to admit, it's got a couple spells and things up on it, but like for the most part, I stick to YouTube and to my podcast. Remember that one of the most profound things about the idea of spirit connection is that it helps prove that there is more to us than this physical body. And when we start to embrace that, we can start to embrace the idea of spiritual connection and life's purpose, and the idea that we are all connected if we can still connect to those who have left this physical plane, but part of them remains in another plane. And it deepens our understanding of what being alive is and helps us release a fear of a very natural process that is death. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care, live well, live magically.